Hey everyone, welcome back to Tinydoor Studios. My name is Brian. I'm going to be your host today. And what we're going to do today is a little walkthrough session of how I set up my Studio One sessions when I do my live recordings and I come back to my little studio here and put them in, get them all arranged, and start doing some rough mixes. Now, I'm not going to sit here and walk through all the plugins that I use and my settings and reverbs and gates and all that kind of fun stuff. There's lots of videos on the internet about that. For me, this is just going to be showing you guys how I set things up, how I color them, how I do my basic routing, my basic panning, and my basic setup to get me started to actually sit down and do one of these sessions. Hopefully this will be a somewhat short tutorial for you guys. Okay, we're here in Studio One now, and I've gone ahead and loaded my tracks into Studio One. This is a session I did live several years ago for a gentleman named Drew Baldridge. For some reason, I recorded the sound check and not the actual show. I don't know if maybe I threw it on another hard drive or what happened, but this is just unfortunately the one sound check track that they did for me. I had recorded it so I could do a virtual playback and do a little bit of tweaking live. Again, this is a live show. So all I do is I have a CL5 at front of house. Everything comes in on Dante, goes into my laptop through either Nuendo Live or through Tracks, and we just capture all 64 inputs, and they've got basic labeling on them for what the festival patch is, so we have some basic, at least, idea of what these tracks are, and we're going to go ahead and relabel those how they're best for me to mix, and also go ahead and set up some groups and everything else. One thing I want to talk about that is my biggest pet peeve when it comes to setting up sessions in DAWs, whether it be Studio One, Pro Tools, Reaper, Nuendo, Logic, any of those, it's all about labeling. The clearer you label your tracks and your buses and your groups, the easier it is to keep your sessions nice and neat and efficient. So here I've only got a few tracks, not a lot, but sometimes my sessions can run in upwards of almost 100 tracks by the time you add in effects, reverbs, delays, groups, all that kind of stuff. Those tracks really add up. That's why it's absolutely crucial to make sure you have a naming scheme that is yours and that you understand. I'm just going to show you mine, or at least most of it. I'm not going to go too deep into details. But you come up with one that you know that you're fast on, you're efficient, and use it over and over and over again. The biggest thing is always make sure you label your tracks before you start. Okay, it's time to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to do this as clean and straight through as I can. Hopefully we get this knocked out relatively quickly. And here we go. So the first thing I'm going to look at here are all my drum tracks. I have all the tracks laid out and imported the way they are coming from my virtual sessions, obviously 1 through 64, since we record all 64 tracks in our live sessions when we do our outside shows. One thing to remember, guys, is I have not seen this session until I opened it up just before I hit record when we started this little YouTube video here, so I might be bumbling around a little bit, taking a listen to things, making sure they are what they are, and hopefully we can get them all organized. So the first thing I can obviously tell is these first 7 tracks look like they're drums. Let's see, we got kick, snare, hat, rack 2, 3, and 2 overheads. Normally I have rack 1, rack 2, rack 3. It's weird that I don't have a high tom in there. I wonder if maybe there was a mispatch and these are the only tracks that actually had audio on them. So maybe that's probably what I did. But the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and color these here. My drums, I generally make blue. I'm going to go ahead and turn those all there in that beautiful blue color. Great. We're going to do that all there. And next we have, looks like 1 bass channel. That's easy enough. We'll make the bass channel green. And let's see here. We got 2, 3. Looks like, get my mouse back here. One more time. And there we go. I got 3 guitar tracks. And my guitars I usually always make green just so they stick out. I try to color bass and guitar differently since they are different instruments. It's just kind of the way that my brain works. Looks like I got a track. Let's take a listen to that track and hear if there's actually anything on there. Looks like there might not be. Nope, no track. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. This is really difficult to do with a microphone in front of your face when you're trying to look at a monitor. All right, so now we've gone ahead and gotten rid of that. The other thing I did too, guys, beforehand is I sent all of my channels. As you can see here, I have inputs. This is the input one is the input of the channel, and then this where it says print is your output. And this applies to the way that Studio One does their inputs and outputs, but it's going to be relatively the same whether you're using Pro Tools, Studio One, Reaper, Logic, Cubase, any of those. The ideas are basically the same. So what I've done is I've taken all of these tracks, sent them to a bus that I call print, and this is generally where I do my final effects, my final compression, and all of those little tweaks. I don't do it on the master bus, which it is over here called main. I don't do it there because if I want to go ahead and bounce something, or in this situation, I actually send a stream of it to where I call streaming here, which is how I send all of this audio into Streamlabs, which is what I use to do my screen recording and my vocal recording. So this way I have individual control on how much I send to my recorder versus how much I send to my in-ears and all that kind of fun stuff. So just we send everything to this print channel. We'll get into that as we get a little deeper into our groups and channels and effects and such. Moving down the chain here, it looks like we got some vocal tracks. I've got, let's see, vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3, vocal 4, and it looks like I don't have anything on vocal 4. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that. And looks like vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3. 62. I wonder what 62 is. Let's take a listen. Definitely sounds like it's an audience mic. I seem to have labeled 63 as crowd. So I'm gonna assume that that's crowd, and I don't really know what 62 is. So I'm gonna go ahead and just get rid of 62. It's really not necessary for this quick tutorial. And then it looks like what I have as input 63 says crowd 01, which obviously means 64 was probably crowd 2. And we're just gonna leave it as that. So the next thing we're going to do is color my vocals. My vocals I generally always make a pink or an amber color. Just that's the way they kind of come up in my brain. And crowd, we'll make crowd something completely different here. So go ahead and make it a bright pink. Now that we have our colors set, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tweak these names just a little bit here so it's a little easier for me to see because everything has this number in front of it, which is the input on my stage racks coming off of the CL. All right, we're going to go ahead and label these real quick. So this is kick. I don't have a kick in or out. I just have one kick, so we're going to leave that. Snare. I call that hat. I'll label these rack 1 and rack 2. Fingers are not cooperating with me today. I'm going to go overhead left. The way I do my labeling and mixing is always from front of house perspective. So the overheads, even though they say overhead left and overhead right, the one that's actually labeled overhead left actually is the one that's above the ride cymbal, and the one that's overhead right labeled is actually above the hi-hat. So that's actually how I see them from front of house. That's how I do all of my labeling. I number and label everything from left to right because I'm a front of house guy. I don't like to think, and I don't like to say, oh, well, they're actually reversed because it's the way they are on the stage. Nope, I look at it, I'm dumb. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, left to right like I count. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and label this bass and guitar 1, and guitar 2, guitar 3. I don't remember if those were double mic'd on a cab or what they are, but we'll take a listen and move forward from there. Call this vocal 1, vocal 2, and vocal 3. Then we'll change this last one to crowd. All right, and there you have it. We've gone ahead and color-coded and labeled our tracks. That is half the battle when it comes to organizing your tracks and keeping your sessions nice, easy, and clean. So now that I've gotten my basic labeling done, I'm going to go ahead and just tweak it a little bit. Now that I see here, I'm going to actually play a little bit, and we're going to listen. We're going to try to label these vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3, and then look at our guitars and see if we can kind of narrow this down a little bit.
I've been here, baby. Raised
That's
up
obviously got to be
hell
Drew.
bent on being bad. Kissed all the girls
Changing
who
it to Drew
love that
vocal.
we had that. Wild hair growing long on us.
That sounds like it's a background vocal.
A country song on us, chasing everything with a skirt on.
Yep, that's definitely a background vocal as well. So we're going to go, we'll leave these vocal 1 and vocal 3. We'll just know that those are going to be backgrounds. All right, now we're going to take a look at these guitars and see if we actually have 3 independent guitars or if I did any kind of doubling or multiple miking. And from looking at these waveforms here, they do look like they're 3 independent ones, but we'll play it and take a listen. Now that's an acoustic. And if I had to guess, Drew probably plays acoustic. So let's stop that. We'll change that to acoustic. And what I'm going to actually do is move that over here in between these again so that everything is how I see it, left to right. So I have guitar 1, acoustic, and then guitar 2. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create my groups for my vocals, my guitars, my bass, and my drums. We'll make it nice and simple since I only have a few. Normally when I do bigger shows like Latin shows where I have multiple percussion players and keyboards and auxiliaries, there's all kinds of stuff. I generally try to create these groups for each of them so that I have one fader that kind of controls all of the audio for that particular area or that particular musician rather than having to manage a bunch of faders. This next part will be specific to Studio One, but it applies to any of the other DAWs. The way we do it and some of this terminology may change slightly depending upon your DAW, but hopefully this kind of gives you the idea of what I'm doing. All right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select all of my drum tracks, and we're going to go and we're going to say add bus for selected channels. And that's going to send all of these drum tracks to one bus that I just had it create for me. And it's automatically sending that bus down the print channel, which is our basically master channel. Ignore this one here that says main. That's just out to my studio speakers. Now we're going to verify that that group actually worked. So we're going to do that in theory if I solo just my drums. By muting, not very much don't hear my drums. Alright, so we know that that actually works. I'm going to stop that for a second. Bass, I'm not going to create a group for the bass because I only have one input. If I had my DI and my mic inputs, then I would go ahead and create a group that way. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to guitars. And we're going to go do the same thing, and we're going to go add a bus. And these buses are different than VCAs. There's a reason I'm not using VCAs yet. These are simply buses. These are actually moving the audio from the number of channels down to one stereo channel. And we're going to go ahead and label this guitars. And we're going to be good and go back and label this drums. There we go. We're also going to color code these the same as we did for the groups that they're in. So we're going to make drums that, and we're going to go here. We're actually going to change all of my guitars and my bass to the same grain because that's just close enough. We're going to go ahead and also do the exact same thing. We're going to go add bus. We're going to call this our vocal bus. Or vocals. And then crowd, I'm not going to worry about right now because we only have one crowd mic. If I had two crowd mics, I'd go ahead and do that. I'm wondering if that's actually from front of house since I only have one and not two. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and do some basic panning. Again, I pan all my stuff as I see it from front of house, so it is not drummer perspective or from the stage. And we're going to go ahead and let's just solo up that drums just for fun, and we're going to go ahead and let this play in a loop and start doing some panning. Going to take our hat, slide that over. There we go. Make our overheads. There we go. That's an okay stereo image. Needs some timing, but we can work with that. I'm going to go ahead and listen to our... And again, I'm panning these kind of how I would remember them on the stage. Bass is generally up the center. I don't usually shift that off to the side. Even though he may not be obviously on the center, he may be over stage left. I don't like moving bass. It just sounds funny to me. I like to keep low end things like the kick and the snare and bass right up the center there, so you don't have to worry about some of that. So we're going to go ahead and play that a little bit more. Okay, we're going to go ahead. We're going to balance our vocals now. There we go. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up a few effects channels for our drums, for our vocals, and for our stringed instruments here. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to go over to my my snare, and I'm going to say let's add an effects channel, and it's going to drop it right next to that. I'm going to call this snare verb. It's generally going to be what it is. And as you can see, unfortunately, it's changed the output of the drum verb to main and not to what would be our print. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that now. Next, we're going to go ahead and add a group for our overheads. This way, I only have one fader when it comes to the overheads, but I still have the ability to EQ them and time them and do dynamics independently left and right. I like having the ability to do that, but also having the flexibility to do a broad effect on them, whether that be compression or EQ. I have the ability to treat those as a broad stroke instead of having to do things twice. So let's go ahead and select these two channels. And now we're going to go ahead and add a bus. It's going to call it a bus, but it's going to be basically a stereo summed channel. Call that overheads. Perfect. And we're going to go ahead and make that blue, just like everything else. Now, the next thing I do is usually set up another reverb for the drums. This is going to be for the kind of space and room of the drums, not just the snare. And then we're going to also set up a parallel processing bus to get a little bit of a crunch if we wanted to do parallel bus for the drums. So the way I'm going to do that is we're going to go to the end of the drum section here and add an effects channel. We're going to call this drum verb. When I can spell. We're going to go ahead and add a parallel bus for the drums. This way, if I wanted to do some parallel compression or parallel EQing on the drums and blend it back in, this is something I usually always add to my drums. So we're going to go ahead and add another bus channel, and we're going to call this one crush. So what we're going to do to engage this this drum crush bus is we're going to go over to the drums, and we're going to send that entire drum bus also to the crush channel. And we're going to go ahead and adjust my screen here a little bit. I'm going to raise this up to right about there, to the unity. And now I have my drum bus actually going, sending out to a parallel channel here that's called drum crush. I'm going to move the drum reverb kind of back in, and we'll leave the crush on the outside. But I'm going to go ahead and label that and color it blue, just like the rest of them. Verbs and effects, sometimes I'll change the colors just to make them stand out a little bit. Since I don't have anything yellow in this, yellow I generally keep for my Latin percussion channels and keys. I'll use yellow for this, so that indicates my reverbs and effects channels. Moving down the line, the next thing I usually do is add a few more effects channels to my guitar world. And I'm going to go ahead and add those in now. We'll add 1, 2, 3 of those. The first one we're going to label guitar. We're going to label this space. That I generally use to kind of widen things up a little bit. We're going to add a delay, and we'll also add a dirt. Dirt is going to basically be very similar to the drum crush idea. That's where I just do a lot of distortion if I want to add some kind of grit to things. So also, just like the other ones, they're not routed to the right place. So always make sure you route those to what would be your proper output. But normally it would be fine if I was sending it out the mains, but I'm not for this particular situation. Moving on, the next thing I'll do is we're going to create some effects channels for our vocals here. And we're going to select all 3 of them. We're going to go right after this last one, and we're going to add 1, 2, 3 effects channels. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and label these short, long, and delay. These are the 3 that I usually use the most. Sometimes I'll add in some parallels. I'll add in more effects depending upon the style of music, the artist, all that kind of stuff. But basically, I usually do a short reverb, a long reverb, and a delay for the vocals. As you can see here, the channels that we just created, they're actually routed to the wrong location. So we're going to go ahead and select those and send them out the right routing for this particular example, which will make sure those are set to print. Beautiful. And we're going to color those yellow. And we're going to go back and color these channels yellow as well, just so that they're there. Great. All right, guys, we're almost there. A few last little things to do and wrap things up. We're going to go ahead and create some VCAs now. The first one that we're going to create is going to be over here on the drums. I'm going to reset this fader channel that I just bumped out of place. The way you do the easy way here in Studio One is we're going to go ahead and we're going to select all of my original tracks. We're not going to do the effects. We're just going to do the actual channels here. And we're going to go ahead and say add VCA for selected groups, for selected channels. I can't read today, guys. And we're going to label this V drums. I really cannot type today. V standing for VCAs. And what we're going to do is I'll color that a different color. We'll color that red. And the last thing I'm going to do is move that all the way down to the end of my drum section here. So the way I have it kind of laid out, just so you guys can see it, we can talk about it here, is I have it laid out from left to right, the way that it normally sits on my console: kick, snare, hat, some toms, some overheads. In there, I've got some effects, just kind of where they land. I've got a master for the drums. I've got a crush for parallel, and then I've got the VCA for the drums. And the VCA for the drums, as you guys can see, is affecting only the actual channels for the drums, not the effects or the buses for those. I'm going to reset those back to 0. We're going to do the same thing here when it comes. We're going to actually leave the bass out of this one, and we're going to create a VCA. I'm going to call this V guitar. All right, there's V guitar. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to take this, turn it red, and bump it down here on the other side. Nope, that is the color, ladies and gentlemen. And it's going to turn that back to red. And we're going to take this. It's hard trying to do this without being able to see. I'm staring into a microphone and trying to look up over the shield to see my monitor. So thanks for bearing with me, guys. And then we're going to do the same thing over here for the vocals. We're going to go ahead and add a VCA. We'll call this VVoc or VVocal, whatever you want. And we're going to bump this on the end of the vocals, and we're going to color it red. All right, guys, and there you have it. That's how I do my basic setup and routing for my sessions when I bring in these live shows. We bring them back here and mess around with them a little bit here at Tinydoor Studios, and I wanted to walk you guys through how I do my basic setup for my workflow here. You can go ahead and save this as a template to save yourself some time, or however you would like to do it in your particular DAW, but this is how I do it in mine, and wanted to kind of walk you guys through my basic setup and my basic panning. Again, I didn't want to bore you guys with looking through a million plugins and trying different EQs and all that kind of fun stuff. When it comes to doing these short little videos, I wanted to keep it as short and sweet as possible. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm Brian here at Tinydoor Studios. Remember to like and subscribe and keep checking back constantly for some new content. And remember, it may be Tinydoor Studios, but we make big sound.